People of Earth, attention. People of Earth, attention.
Hi and welcome to the channel. This time around I'm talking about two more movies, big surprise there. And the movies are Reveille with Beverly starring Ann Miller, Franklin Pangborn and Larry Parks, followed by Six Lessons from Madame Lazonga starring Lupe Velez, William Frawley and Shem Howard. Actually I'm not, I'm talking about Earth versus the Flying Saucers and It Came from Beneath the Sea, both of which have special effects by Ray Harryhausen. So how's everybody doing? We've had 2 weeks now of Socialist Paradise and it's going well so far. Though I did have a discussion on Facebook with somebody who said that apparently all of the children in Australia are brainwashed and that our government controls us a lot. I think he had my country mixed up with his. But anyway, moving right along. 2 movies, 1955 and 1956. It Came from Beneath the Sea was 1955. 1956 is when Earth versus the Flying Saucers came out. And both of them have a lot to say about what the world was like 66 and 67 years ago. I'll show you the disc as well because people sometimes like that. Here's my DVD of Earth versus the Flying Saucers, which is quite old. It's got English, German, French, Italian and Spanish subtitles. There's the back cover. And I have this indicator Blu-ray of It Came from Beneath the Sea, which has a ton of extras on it. You can freeze frame that one if you want to see what the extras are. But the odd thing is that just as I received this in the mail, I must have had a midnight binge. Then I got this in the mail, which is the Blu-ray with It Came from Beneath the Sea, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and the 3 Worlds of Gulliver starring Kerwin Matthews. So I've basically got this 3-disc set for this movie. That's how it goes when you're a movie collector. Sometimes you don't get it right. Sometimes you stuff up. And I've stuffed up. So these 2 are going to a friend who collects these things. And this one is going to sit on this shelf as an object lesson on me to check my database and make sure I don't already have movies. It Came from Beneath the Sea, 1955, directed by Robert Gordon, which for me is a bit of a cognitive dissonance because I know somebody with a totally similar name who's currently in jail for grooming young girls. But leaving that aside, It Came from Beneath the Sea is one of the first American kaiju movies. Yeah, there was Tarantula, there was Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, but this one's still up there. It's still fairly early. It came out the same year that the Americanized version of Godzilla came out, so there are a lot of large monsters in 1950s cinema, mostly thanks to Toho Films for making Godzilla and totally shaking up everything and not just Tokyo. So the movie starts with a lot of filler stuff about submarines. You've got Kenneth Tobey and a couple of other guys sitting in a submarine. They're testing out an atomic submarine. They don't actually give it a name. It's just called The Atomic Submarine, which shows a singular lack of imagination on the part of the people who wrote this movie. And they're kind of sitting in these cramped circumstances, which are obviously either a set left over from another movie or a real submarine they got permission to film on. They're testing the submarine out and they find something's following them. And it's not another submarine, it's something else. And that something else basically grabs hold of them. They dive down deep, they get away from it, and it leaves a piece of itself on the propeller shaft of the atomic submarine. That's then sent to the scientists to investigate as the submarine is getting repaired. And one of the scientists is played by Faith Domergue, who, along with an actor called Donald Curtis, becomes part of a love triangle between Kenneth Tobey's character, I'm not going to name them because they've all got generic characters, Kenneth Tobey's character, Faith Domergue's scientist woman, and Donald Curtis as the scientist who works with her. They finally figure out that it's an octopus. Well, the easy way to do that would have been to take some of the flesh, saute it in a bit of garlic butter and see how it tastes. The movie was made on a $1 million budget with a $1.7 million box office, so it made money back. It did okay at the box office. without doing great. You've got to remember in the 1950s they didn't spend twice the budget of the movie promoting the movie. And so Columbia Studios did okay out of this one. So there's a few things of interest in this movie. First off, the guys kind of accept the fact that Faith Domighew's scientist character is a new kind of woman who's an equal to men in the workplace and who's as smart as the men are. Now, I would have thought 10 years before this I would have known that, because basically all the aeroplanes that America threw at Japan in World War II were mostly put together by women. So it would have been fairly obvious that women are pretty capable in the workplace. But this movie has to underline that a little bit. It's kind of maybe a nod to Howard Hawks, because Howard Hawks did a lot of movies where women were very competent. But it gives it a little bit more of a modern feel than a lot of these movies of the time had. And right up until the end, you kind of don't know which of the two guys she's going to settle for. You kind of guess that it's Kenneth Tobey playing the submarine captain, and she likes them both, so ultimately she makes a decision about which one she likes. And it doesn't feel like she's being used as a prize for the most successful guy in the movie, because both men do heroic things while they are trying to kill this giant octopus, which rips down the Golden Gate Bridge and does a whole bunch of other stuff. Ray Harryhausen's special effects are used kind of sparingly. It took a lot of time to do the sinuous curling of an octopus's tentacle. He ended up making an octopus with only 6 tentacles. But the special effects in the stop motion work because we want them to work. We kind of lean into anything with the Ray Harryhausen special effect in it, and we like it because we know the kind of work that went into it. We know nobody else was quite at this level of doing this stuff. Yeah, Willis O'Brien had been working since the 1930s on things like King Kong and Mighty Joe Young, but this is the beginning of next level stop motion animation, which Ray Harryhausen continued well into the 1980s. Forget what I said a moment ago, because the octopus is radioactive because it's been kicked up by American nuclear testing and it's radioactive as hell. So you probably don't want to saute a piece of it with some garlic butter. A word to the wise on that one. You get the usual thing where the suits doubt the science until the thing emerges in San Francisco. And there's a really interesting scene where one of the sailors who's seen something doesn't want to tell anybody because he thinks that the people are going to think he's insane. And Leslie, the character played by Faith Domigheu, talks to him like a human being rather than like a military person, and gets the guy to open up and give them some clues about what this thing is.
Okay, but if you say I said this, I'll say I didn't. You won't believe this, but something happened to a ship I was on. She went down with all hands, except me and a few others. It was a giant octopus.
And I like that she doesn't necessarily use her feminine wiles as much as using her empathy. They ultimately deal with it a number of ways, one of which is a jet torpedo, which is kind of cool looking. They end up basically blasting the hell out of it, but there's a little bit of heroics that go on as well before that happens. And that stuff kind of works well because you've got to have that level of humanizing the technology that's used to kill the monster. If you don't do that, it tends to be a little bit of stock footage and then a big bang. But the movie doesn't do that. It manages to make the two male characters in this one heroic, each in their own way, when the octopus is attacking and they need to get the jet torpedo to blow it up. It's a difficult thing to do that in certain kinds of action films and also science fiction movies in general. The way balancing out the gosh wow and the special effects with the human dimension of things is something that people are still working on, and it's something that's quite important to the genre as well. Otherwise you just end up with something that looks like an animatic out of a computer game. It Came From Beneath the Sea is kind of cool. It's a little bit forward thinking when it comes to gender roles, which I really appreciated, because I hate liking a movie and liking what it does with the science fiction and the special effects and the plot and the characters and things, and then you get cringeworthy things in it. Then there are a number of science fiction movies of the time that do have their cringeworthy moments. I mean, even Forbidden Planet's got one of those things with the kind of pseudo skinny dipping scene with Anne Francis and the way that Leslie Nielsen's character reacts to that. It's there are kind of moments in that movie that act a little bit like their service comedies, like No Time for Sergeants or something like that. But this movie avoids that by putting the scientists front and center along with the submarine commander, who's is the kind of character you want for a submarine commander. You know, he talks to his men, he doesn't talk down to his men, and he gets information out of them on the submarine. You see a lot of that leadership stuff playing out at the start of the movie, and that works kind of well. But It Came From Beneath the Sea tended to be shown here in Australia, at least, a lot on late night television with Horror Movie House. In fact, I remember seeing it with the Australian Sydney version of Deadly Earnest, our Horror Movie House. Weird thing is that there were 3 Deadly Earnests. There was one in Sydney, there was one in Melbourne, and there was one in Adelaide. Each played different actors, but with different personas as well. But the Sydney one was the coolest because, as I've said before on the channel, Ian Bannerman's Deadly Earnest looked a lot like Harry Palmer as a zombie, and that added an extra level of cool to that particular one. But I'm digressing a little bit. Just to summarise on It Came From Beneath the Sea, which is not to be mistaken for It Came From Outer Space. The characters' work, the special effects by Ray Harryhausen at the start of his career are pretty damn good, even though they're not photorealistic in any way at all. And the idea of a giant radioactive octopus attacking San Francisco has a certain weird wonderfulness about it that you can really lean into, and it's worth a revisit, and it holds up well. That brings us to 1956 and Earth versus the Flying Saucers, directed by Fred F. Sears. Now, Fred F. Sears did one other movie that I like a lot, even though it's kind of crazy. Fred F. Sears was the director of Calypso Heatwave from 1958, a movie that tried to cash in on Calypso music and sadly failed. This one starts out well. A car driving across the California desert. In it are a guy called Russ Marvin and his wife Carol. They're newlyweds. He's dictating notes because he's literally a rocket scientist. And the movie is set tiny bit in the future. America already has 11 satellites orbiting the Earth. So Russ is dictating his notes on a big reel-to-reel tape recorder, and the car gets buzzed by a UFO. They try to tell the people when they get back to work what happened, and the base they work in, Operation Skyhook, is blasted by a UFO and smashed to pieces. They're lucky enough to be in a basement and they survive. Meanwhile, the father of Carol, a general played by Morris Ankrum, has been captured by and brainwashed by the aliens. Now, there's a scene before all of this stuff goes down at the military base, which shocked me a lot. It was a cultural disconnect that I simply couldn't ignore. There's a scene with Carol and Russ and the father-in-law played by Morris Ankrum, where they're out in the backyard eating. And as an Australian guy, it seemed incredibly weird to me that a woman was doing the barbecuing. Now, there's a cultural thing here in Australia that guys do the barbecuing. It's not necessarily a sexist thing, it's just a kind of cultural thing. By the way, Luna just walked away. It turns out that Russ got some audio of the flying saucer on his reel-to-reel tape recorder, and when they slow down the reel-to-reel tape recorder, they find out that the aliens were trying to communicate with him, but speaking very fast because apparently there's a time synchronization problem with the alien spaceships versus kind of our world. Don't know what that means, don't know why they put that in there, but they did. So basically there's a miscommunication, but it doesn't matter because the aliens are here to take over the Earth. And while Russ is being kind of debriefed about what happened, and Carol is as well, he decides he's going to communicate with the aliens on the requested frequency at the required time without any official approval. Now, in most circumstances, in reality, that would put him in jail for a very long time, but no, he does that. They tell him to go out to Chesapeake Bay, and where they've landed one of their spaceships, which, Chesapeake Bay doesn't look a lot like Malibu, but the place where they land the spaceships does because it was filmed on the west coast, not the east coast of America. And the place where they land looks nothing like a tidal estuary. The aliens come from a disintegrated solar system, and they've come to Earth, and they want all of the world leaders to assemble in Washington because it's fairly clear that in some way they have seen the day the Earth stood still. And these aliens are not nice people. They basically index the brain of the general played by Maurice Ancram with a thing called an infinitely indexed memory bank, which sounds like something that Elon Musk is trying to do with a brain implant, but apparently no. What it does is it gets all the information out of your brain, dumps it back in there, but it doesn't dump it in there in the same way around. So the alien spaceships land, they've got a force field around them, they've got ray guns that zappy-zap people and machinery, and the good guys, being basically half a dozen people in a military base, have to find a way to beat the aliens, and they do that by creating an ultrasonic gun which scrambles the magnetic field of the force field that protects the alien spaceships and lets them fly around. The other thing you need to know too is that for some reason the aliens are incredibly lightweight. I don't know whether they blow away in a breeze, because their spacesuits weigh a few grams. The aliens don't seem to be very smart. One of them gets shot with small arms fire. They take the helmet off and they find out that he's an incredibly old creature. So basically, Earth versus the Flying Saucers could have been called Invasion of the Old Farts from Outer Space. So the aliens start attacking Washington DC, and you get a lot of that good Ray Harryhausen stuff. Rotation of the spaceships hitting and blasting away various iconic monuments in Washington DC, all of which was animated by Ray Harryhausen, including falling masonry and things like that. It's an incredibly painstaking business to do that, to animate like falling debris and chunks of debris at 24 frames a second is a pretty big ask, but Harryhausen manages it, and it gives the movie a different look than the usual pie tin Plan 9 from outer space alien spaceships. Again, this is a Columbia B picture. It's not an A picture, and Columbia was a B studio in Hollywood in the 1950s. It did things like the Three Stooges shorts, and it also did some really interesting films, kind of B movies in the 1950s particularly, and Umbrella Entertainment are providing me with one that I'm going to review in a future video, a thing called Cult of the Cobra, which they're putting out on Blu-ray, and I'm very happy that they are. But Columbia Studios, if you look for a list of Columbia Studios science fiction and genre films, you're going to see that there are a hell of a lot of them during that era. And many of them are really, really interesting. Things like Curse of the Undead, where Australian actor Michael Pape plays a vampire gunslinger. Lots of little kind of weird small films where the studio could throw some money at them, but not too much, and give kind of a weird experience for people watching these movies in drive-ins and hardtop cinemas and double features. All props to Ray Harryhausen for Earth versus the Flying Saucers. It gave me a chance to animate something that wasn't organic, and so he could play around with the rotating spaceship and the big tube that comes down from the bottom of it. The production design is very sparse, but it kind of works. The interiors of the spaceships are very kind of Spartan and sparse. But that works well because it's a very unfriendly environment. And it makes you wonder, what the aliens did for recreation while they were flying around the universe. By the way, the writer of this, Bernard Gordon, didn't get his name on the movie until many years later because he was blacklisted at the time by the House Un-American Activities Committee and the Blacklist. So he wasn't technically allowed to write this movie, but he did. And his name went on the credits decades afterwards. And there's an extra on the Blu-ray which talks about his contribution to cinema. And I like that. I like the fact that people are finally getting their due in cinema. People like them, people like Bernard Gordon and Dalton Trumbo, and all of those guys who were on the blacklist but still worked under pseudonyms. With the kind of tacit approval of the producers at the studios, they contributed a lot to cinema during those times, even though they were paid very well and they were treated very, very poorly by both the American government and by the Hollywood system. So that's another reason to like Earth versus the Flying Saucers. If there's a weak thing in this movie, it's the characterization of Joan Taylor's character Carol, who gets to play a kind of generic wife character without too much agency in the movie, and I don't like it when that happens. Rewatching the two is a great experience. They're both a lot of fun. Harryhausen's contribution really lifts them above a lot of the other stuff that was coming out at the time. Columbia Pictures did a great job of producing B pictures like this throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s. And all respect to Madman Entertainment for putting out these triple features. The second one of these that they did, there's another one of, it's called The Fantastic Films of Ray Harryhausen. This is collection number 2. And there is a collection number 1, which I'll throw up on the screen now, which shows you the kind of stuff they're putting out and the fact that they're making this stuff available. Let me have a look here. Is it region locked? Yeah, it's region B locked. But again, if you're going to collect physical media, you might as well have a multi-region Blu-ray player. You're going to do yourself a lot of good if you do. But anyway, that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. You can also support the channel and my addiction to buying duplicate movies by going to patreon.com/paleocinema. I'm going to be doing something different next week. I've got a stack of videos I really want to review. And there are going to be some 1960s obscurities, which I think is going to be real fun to share. So stick around for that. Subscribe definitely, because it'll tell you when the new videos are coming up and you don't have to scramble for them. And check out the playlists as well, because I've got playlists in different genres and different types of movies. And you can kind of binge those and see the kinds of movies that I review that you like. Anyway, look after yourselves. Stay safe. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Do a bit of retro 1950s stuff, because I know you guys like it. And I'll catch you next time.